Okay, so we're back for one final TOK essay title discussion, and it's the first one. It starts with a quote from Pablo Picasso. Others have seen what is and asked why. I have seen what could be and asked why not. So, quite a novel approach today. I'm going to talk to this question in relation to arts and literature. Ms. Rines will discuss the question from the perspective of natural sciences, and Caelan Hermans joins us as a former ICHK TOK student and will give us the year 13 some really practical advice about how to approach the title and break down key parts of the question. So, Picasso, we did talk about Picasso in subsequent previous title discussions, and I just wonder what he's getting at here. It seems to me this is an artist, so TOK, AOK, the arts, and I know that I need to be responding to at least one other area of knowledge. So maybe there's a danger of going down a mainstream approach here, but I will start with Picasso, and I think perhaps this is in opposition to the natural sciences or history, where people conduct inductive, deductive reasoning to work out how our physical world operates, or maybe to look at historical artifacts and work out what could be the reason for societies or cultures existing in certain ways. So if we can just have a look at the first Picasso image. This is Weeping Woman. Now here, this is very different from realism. This is not how a woman looks, how we're conditioned to seeing people. But I think what he was maybe hoping to do with this abstract cubist depiction of a portrait was maybe to show the emotion, to use his imagination to get to the essence of the trauma that woman is experiencing. In another of Picasso's famous images, Guernica, you can see this huge symbolic painting here. This is in response to the Luftwaffe's bombing of Guernica. Now, I don't know, here there's all kinds of symbolic imagery which we might guess as to what it could represent. There's some very iconic symbols from Spanish cultural life, like the bull and the horse from the bull ring, and then other images in the top right there. We can see some the anguish screaming either of a soldier. We can see the chaotic scenes. So this is not an actual documentary source of evidence, but it maybe tells us something about how it felt to be in Spain at the time. To understand historical events, maybe art gives us one way of understanding, but I think in opposition we might want to look at a more scientific approach to understanding the world. So can we go back to the question, Eric? How would a natural scientist view this question, Ms. Rines?
I mean, I think the interesting thing here is, so I sort of disagree with you that the natural sciences work upon this idea that's inherently logical, right, and always built on evidence. I think the vast majority of theories that are groundbreaking, even the ones that don't work, right, take string theory, for example, really come from imaginative sides of people. I think there is that kind of we lose ourselves in thinking that all ways of knowing within science are based upon empirical evidence. When in many, many cases, you can look at the way that scientists think about things, and they typically come at it from a very abstract, very creative position. I mean, you take people take Einstein, for example. He certainly was mathematical in the way that he approached things. His way of supporting and creating evidence to verify facts certainly comes from that empirical side of the world, but his creativity that leads him down that path of what he maybe in reality sees is quite creative. So how do you come up with the idea of relativity? Do you guys know that story? It's kind of cool, right? We all know that Einstein equals mc squared. So how did he come up with the idea is that he literally thought about chasing a beam of light. Right? That is not a logical, like, sitting around one day. And that's quite a linear direction into how he got into it. It took him about 7 years to come up with his theory. So if you think about a 7-year process, it's quite a long journey to go on. And the idea coming from this weird thought experiment that's really kind of comes from a fanciful place, of chasing a beam of light, and what's that mean? Right? And how does that take all the assumptions that we know about the world of science, and what does that mean? Do they hold true? Do they not hold true? So that would be my place of challenging it, is that you could definitely take something like this. Others have seen what is and asked why, and I have seen what could be and asked why not. And there are probably many different scientific discoveries that fall into categories of where people have actually been looking at maybe what is there or what isn't there, and started asking questions that are totally illogical. And those totally illogical questions make us question the assumptions that we base things on. Because I would say one thing for TOK, across the board in science, is that in almost every single theory that hopefully you guys have been taught in your IB sciences, we put assumptions up on the board. Yes? Right? Physics and chemistry for sure. Hopefully in biology you kind of see some of that as well, and in ESS. It's those assumptions that we can invalidate, right? It's those assumptions that lead to us not being 100% sure, or for fallibility within those areas. I don't know.
Yeah. So I think that some of your TOK questions do have a tendency to lead you into assumptions. For example, like, it would be an assumption to say that Picasso is representative of all artists within the arts. And
for sure.
I think also, this is one quotation from an artist whose career spanned decades and decades. So I don't think that this quotation in isolation can be representative of the artist himself. I think, in response to this, I'm going to ask Caelan shortly just to see how she would approach this. But I think you need to be wary of defining the terms and trying to find the claims and counterclaims. So I would be looking at things like others. Well, who are the others? It depends on which other area of knowledge. And have seen what is. Well, we all know, because of our study with the ways of knowing, that sense perception, our perspective on reality, may be different, and it may be flawed because of some of those cognitive or cultural biases that affect ways of knowing, such as memory, such as language, and sense perception itself, because we all have different rods and cones, and when we see colour in different ways. So I worry about that. I'd also think, going back to Guernica, well, Guernica is that painting, isn't that cry for humanity, asking why? Like, why is it that a higher power would unleash a bombing campaign on an unguarded, unprotected civilian population? And I think that might be the role of quite a lot of pieces of artwork, is that they do hold a light or a mirror back to society and make us question things about our understanding of the world. So, Caelan, how would you take on this question?
Well, right on the back of that, the first 3 things that I would do would be to pick my areas of knowledge and select the ways of knowing that I would be exploring, as well as selecting key concepts or definitions that need to be defined. So immediately, because it's from Picasso, I would automatically think that an area of knowledge would be art. And then going off of that, I would think history. But after hearing Mrs. Rines speak, I think that actually having an opposing or different or unusual area of knowledge to contrast that would be more beneficial in terms of constructing your counterclaims, as well as even using Picasso as a more knowledgeable other, and then contrasting that with Einstein. As well, I think the ways of knowledge that immediately come into my mind, like Mr. Rees said, is sense perception, emotion, reason, imagination. And I think something that immediately I thought of is what others have seen, what is, and asked why. What does that mean? And what does it mean when he says, I have seen what could be and asked why not? So I think you really need to explore the difference between asking why and asking why not. What's the difference between those two? Do they exist independently, or are they dependent on each other? I personally think that you kind of have to do both in order to gain personal knowledge. But yeah, that's how I would go about it immediately.
Yeah, I can even like tag into that. Like I think a really cool one that actually would be accessible, particularly to any of you. I mean, honestly, anybody that's gone through GCSE could answer this question. When you look at like theories of the model of the atom, right? So you go from like the Dalton's spherical model, the billiard ball model, up to like Rutherford, Thompson, right, where we get all the way to where we are now with the quantum mechanical model with the electron cloud. Like, so that what is a really interesting question in science. You know, what people have seen. Okay, what do you mean seen? We don't see things in chemistry. We've never actually seen. So when these models of the atom were developed, nobody had seen them. You could not actually validate it by seeing it, which is actually kind of a really cool way to think about it. Scientists don't, quote unquote, always see their work. They can prove it using evidence that they gain from experiments, right? They can look at mathematical relationships that we know exist to support their argument, but they can't see it. So that's a really cool one to think of in the world of physics and chemistry, where they can't actually see it, and then they say, what is? Right? Well, so for those of you in the world of physics and chemistry and biology, where we don't have tangible images of certain things that we talk about, how is it that others could have seen it? And then asked why. Well, yeah, okay, so then you get into that really cool question of why, and for us in chemistry and physics and biology, we're driven by the things that are the whys behind it, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot of, even though this question obviously inherently, because it says Pablo Picasso, we go right to the art world. I wonder if you took his name off and re-asked yourself how you'd approach this quote, if you wouldn't come up with very different distinctions and different ways of approaching it, right? Do we think art simply because we see his name, or do we think art because the quote leads us to that interpretation of how we view things?
Can we try now? Can we just imagine? Okay, if it wasn't Picasso asking this, would it not be the case that, like in mathematics, that there are
How do we see
revolutionary mathematicians
Yes.
who are trying to find ways to expand the shared knowledge within that by trying to recreate. Well, I'm definitely like out of my comfort zone when I talk about mathematics, but. We have said in previous essay title discussions that like there was like Newtonian explanations of reality using mathematical formulas were useful up to a point, but they only explained maybe the things that we could see or comment on here on Earth. But for quantum mechanics and other layers, other more complex, innovative realms of physics, using mathematical formulas to explain things that are beyond what we can observe, that there has to be an imaginative...
theory of everything, right?
Yeah,
We'd love to get a theory of everything. We don't have a theory that relates gravity to all the other forces. Yeah, is where you're going. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, just
quick point.
Yes. Yeah.
Based on what Ms. Rines was just saying about what you actually see and can't see in order to have knowledge, I think as a TOK student, something that you would need to do is you can ask the question, well, how reliable is our ways of knowing?
Yeah.
How reliable is sense perception? And then you can explore that in relation to the different areas of knowledge as well.
Yeah, I mean, like cool ones. Those of you in biology, right? If you're super interested in like genetics, how do we know things like CRISPR works? Right? Gene editing, where we know we can splice. Well, the only way we quote unquote see it, right, is looking at electrophoresis, right? Looking at the actual chromatograms that come up, and then we can look at those and see, oh, okay, we do see that genes are moving around. We can actually see that the genes are moving around, right? So it is kind of it's an interesting way to look at this question. Take away the art. I would say start to pull out some of those key terms in there, right? The seen, the what, the why, and the others. I love the others. I think that's a really interesting thing, right? When we go into the world of like mathematics, science, and we come at it from the perspective the others can quite frequently actually be quite wrong. We forget that in science there are quite large egos at play, because I think a lot of times we see those theories without the human beings sitting in front of them. But any of you that are interested in taking a look at this from a scientific perspective, go look at like the battles that occurred between personalities when different theories have conflicted with one another. And a great one is that same one I brought up, the discovery or the refining of the model of the atom. Those scientists hated each other. they were quite often mentor versus mentee. The relationships changed. You had people disproving other people's theories, and the others would stifle those ways of knowledge and the ways of describing things quite often.
Right, okay, so I think with this, we've discussed a few ways into the question. I think what you could do from the next steps would be to get these questions in front of your subject specialist teachers, discuss the different methodologies and approaches, discuss the historical development of the shared knowledge within that area of knowledge, and just see where there were these pioneers in other spheres like mathematics, like history, maybe economics, even using statistical models to predict futures. And who are those people who are asking why not just the artists?
Yeah, I think history would be a really neat one here. Yeah. Others have seen what is, like historical perspectives are so biased.
Yeah.
It'd be a really neat one to look at there.
All right.
Cool.
Well, thank you very much, Caelan. Thank you very much, Michelle. And that's all for us.